everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm Barbara Bell. I'm Artistic Director of Kingston WritersFest, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this special fundraising presentation and afternoon with Louise Penny. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the festival customarily takes place and on which I stand at the moment is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. We gratefully acknowledge these Indigenous nations for their ongoing guardianship of this land. We agree to peaceably share in responsibility for stewardship of this land, its waters, and all of its biodiversity. All those who come to live and work here are responsible for honoring these relationships in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. On behalf of the festival, I'd like to thank each of you for your generous support of this fundraising event and to express my sincerest thanks to Louise Penny for agreeing to appear today in support of Kingston WritersFest. Special thanks to Jamie Broadhurst at Franco's Books for offering me this opportunity to present Louise in her only Canadian stop of the international virtual tour and for facilitating all of the details. We're very grateful also to the Isabel Bader Center for the Performing Arts for the use of their green room as a broadcast space for Eric Friesen. Thanks also to Kingston's independent novel idea bookstore for their support of today's presentation. And of course, copies of Louise Penny's All the Devils Are Here are on hand and available to purchase in person, and or you can phone or online order for pickup, shipment. They're easy to find online, and on Facebook, just search Novel Idea Kingston. We'd love to know where you're joining us from, so please shout out using the Q&A function. All are welcome wherever you are. Also, just FYI, your questions for Louise should be posted there. So no spoilers, please, of recent or past plot points, or we won't be able to use your question. And now to the good stuff. I'll start with an introduction of Eric, and then I'm going to turn things over to him. Eric Friesen is a broadcaster, writer, and speaker on music, culture, and faith in both Canada and the United States. He was a network host and executive for both CBC Radio and Minnesota Public Radio, and the founding program director for Winnipeg's new classical and jazz station, Classic 107. During this pandemic, Eric has been hosting a twice-weekly Zoom cast for the Ottawa Chamber Music Festival, Chamber Chats at Home Chez Vous, some 40 broadcasts so far featuring interviews with musicians whose lives have been completely upended due to COVID-19. Eric also continues to serve a wide variety of major cultural organizations in Canada, the US, and internationally. One of his favorite occupations, though, is to interview writers, musicians, and actually anyone who's interested in our cultural life. He has a particular interest in the intersection between music and literature. He is past chair of Kingston WritersFest and the Honans International Piano Competition based in Calgary. Among his many volunteer activities, Eric co-hosts a book club in the Maximum Unit of Collins Bay Prison Institution here in Kingston, Ontario. He makes his home on Amherst Island, the westernmost of the Thousand Islands, on the border between upstate New York and eastern Ontario. Eric was made a member of the Order of Canada in 2019. Please welcome Eric Friesen.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And a great pleasure to welcome Louise Penny back to the Kingston WritersFest. Alas, by Zoom, but online is the way these days, and hopefully not forever. And to welcome Louise back in the presence of her new Armand Gamache novel, her 16th in the series, All the Devils Are Here. Here being a new location for these Gamache novels, not in Three Pines, Quebec, not anywhere in Quebec really, but in Paris, France. The book is just out for a few days, but already has had a tidal wave of reviews and is selling like hotcakes everywhere. And it's to talk about the rave reviews, I mean, Wall Street Journal, London Daily Mail, which Louise put out on Facebook just a few days ago. The London Daily Mail saying, vintage Penny, delicate, engrossing, and subtle. Absolutely. People's Magazine Book of the Week, Amazon Book of the Month. And these are just about a few. I mean, it will be reviewed everywhere by the most senior reviewers of every organization. In less than 20 years of writing, Louise Penny has become an internationally best-selling author. The Gamache novels have been translated into at least 29 languages and a bunch of awards. The Agatha Award for Best Mystery, I think at least 7 times, and the Anthony Award for Best Novel of the Year. Her publisher has planned an initial run of 750,000 copies, which is in the stratosphere for a new novel, but I have a feeling they'll be doing a second run pretty darn quickly. And her fans are legion, of course. And this is because, most importantly, Louise Penny is loved by her readers, personally loved, because they recognize that her ultimate vision in these novels is that goodness exists. Despite the devils, despite the darknesses, despite the disappointments, despite the failures that lurk everywhere, goodness does triumph in her novels. It's a hard-won triumph, but goodness does exist, and she reminds us of it with every new book, including this one that has just come out, All the Devils Are Here. Louise Penny joins us, not from Paris, not from Three Pines, Quebec, but from London in the UK. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Eric. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. That was just beautiful. That means a lot to me. You and I are friends. We go back a long way.
We do, and it's a great pleasure to engage with you again.
Well, it's great to be back at the Kingston Writers Festival. I'm trying to remember when I first did, I think my first appearance at the Kingston Writers Festival, well, it was at least 10 years ago, and it was with Peter Robinson. He and I.
That's right. I think I interviewed you for that. Yes. I think I missed one. Yes. This is your 3rd time, I think, right, at the Writers Festival?
Right.
Yeah.
You mean I cheated on you with someone else?
Probably Sheila Rogers.
Probably that Sheila Rogers.
Yeah, we don't mind cheating between each other. That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. So let's get right into it. Talk about the new novel. All the Devils Are Here. Here being Paris. Paris, a new location, new locale for the Gamache mysteries. There's a little bit of homesickness for Three Pines in it, but essentially the novel is completely and profoundly based in Paris. So why Paris, Louise?
Well, I knew from probably the 3rd book that Paris would eventually be a setting, which is odd because I don't know Paris all that well. I know London much better. I have a flat here. That's where I am. But I don't know Paris all that well. But I said in the 3rd book that Armand's son, Daniel, and his wife and the grandchildren live in Paris. And then we've had some sort of skirmishes with Daniel. We've gotten to know him a little bit. But as I said, I've sort of been aiming toward this. But I knew that the characters had to be in a certain place for the Paris book to work. And I knew I had to be in a certain place as a writer because I knew it was going to be a real challenge. That I would have some obstacles to writing in Paris that didn't exist when I was writing about a place that I'm so familiar with, like the Three Pines, of course. So that's why, really. And the last book, without getting into too much detail, had a major character moving to Paris. So it just seemed like this was the right time. And I guess Paris is a great city. I mean,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Well, in fact, you say you don't know it very well, but in fact, when I finished the book, I thought, among many other things, this is a kind of love letter to Paris. Is it not?
Thank you. Thank you. You couldn't say anything better than that. That means a lot to me because, as you know, for me, location is a character, setting is a character. And it's really important for me to evoke that. But that was one of the challenges because I knew that in leaving Three Pines, a lot of readers would be disappointed because there is a sense of belonging, it has become a home, there's a sense of ownership, not just of the village, but of the villagers that come along with it. So I'd be leaving that behind and I would have to, or want to, try to create that same sense of belonging in Paris. Well, in a small village, it's, it has its challenges as well, but it's not that difficult to describe it and to have a sense of warmth and community. Massive world city. It's a lot more difficult. So I was forced to go to Paris a couple of times.
Do lots of research.
Do lots of research, eat at a lot of sidewalk cafes. And in fact, all the restaurants that I mentioned in the book exist, and the bistros and the cafes all exist. But one of the themes you mentioned the themes before about goodness, and one of the themes is our yearning to belong, to connect with other people, and to connect with, to put down roots. So I really wanted to do that with Paris, but I understood that I could never capture the whole city. So I really had to choose one or two neighborhoods. And once I realized the Paris really is, I mean, I know that, I guess, the arrondissement, but they are very specific neighborhoods, and people really identify. They don't say, I live in Paris, they say, I live in the Marais, I live in Saint-Germain, I live in the First, I live in wherever. So that's what I decided to do, was choose just two of these neighborhoods and really get to know them. And so I have Armand and his family and his godfather really focus on these two neighborhoods. We get to see other parts of Paris, but for the most part, that became the focus.
And in fact, didn't you rent a place in the Marais?
How do you know this? Like, what is it? Oh my God. What? Yes, I did. A bunch of us, I was a little worried about going back to Paris. It was going to be the first time since Michael died. And I had only ever been to Paris with Michael, and I had only been introduced to Paris with Michael when I was 36, and long after I thought it would ever be possible to be in Paris, period, never mind with the man I love. And then it happened. And so I bonded with Paris at that moment. But I'd been back a few times with Michael, but not without. So I was really quite worried about that. That and not really knowing Paris and not wanting to bumble around. I wanted to find a Paris that you wouldn't find in a guidebook. I wanted to find the hidden gems of little neighborhood restaurants, the little patisseries, the fromageries, the gardens in Paris, not the Luxembourg, which everybody finds and it's beautiful, the Tuileries. But the little hidden gems of gardens I wanted to find and write about. The ones that Armand would know about because he'd been to Paris every year since he was 8. So I asked a couple of friends to join us, one in particular, Guy Cote, who knows Paris really well. So yeah, we rented a place, a really old, apparently it was one of the oldest, obviously still standing buildings in the Marais, which therefore made it one of the oldest in Paris. And it showed every day of that age. It was vertical. Oh my God. And tiny. I mean, these people obviously, way back when it was built, did not eat a lot of croissants. Like me.
You've already mentioned Daniel, the son, because he went to Paris with his family in the last book. This whole relationship between the father, Armand, and the son, Daniel, is something that always strikes me. I mean, I have a son. I'm the son of a father, and this whole relationship between fathers and sons, I mean, this goes back to the Greeks, right? To the Greek mythology, and it's been written about Turgenev and Joseph Roth and many others. And you've made it a kind of, it's an important strand of your books, this relationship between the father and the son. And what can you say about that as it develops in this novel without really giving away any of the story?
Well, that really is a leitmotif that runs through most of the books, actually, the relationship. The books are about many things, least of all murder, although they are proudly crime novels. But the murder is really the Trojan horse in which all these other themes ride in. And one of them is, and has been, love. But love takes so many forms, and who are we to decide what is legitimate and what isn't? And one form of love in the books is the love between Armand and Jean-Guy. You know, this is the father-son relationship he has with his second in command. But that has been an irritant with his actual son, Daniel, for a long time. but there was also more at play. It was clear that there was some history there, that they seemed to get up each other's noses, that they just couldn't get on the same wavelength, even though Daniel was a thoughtful, kind, smart individual like his father. They couldn't mesh. And Armand couldn't figure out why not. But we find out what happened in this particular book, again, in a garden.
Right. I was very glad for that, because it's a question I've been asking for a long time. You know?
And the thing is, Eric, that I didn't know. I didn't know until I came close to writing that scene, because I knew it had to be resolved in this book, but I didn't know what the resolution was, and I didn't know what the problem was. I just knew that there had been something happened when Daniel was very young enough so that it became part of his core belief. But I didn't know what it was. And I really, I went for a lot of walking. We talked about music, and Barbara mentioned music, and I listen to a lot of music when I'm writing, not as I'm writing, but after I stop writing, I listen to music. When I'm on a plane, I listen to music, or in the car, and it releases something inside me. So I would go for walks and I would listen to music, and I would try to see Armand and Daniel in the garden, and what would they be talking about? What could have happened to this young boy? And why would he not tell his father about it? And how could it last for 30 years or more?
So what kind of music were you listening to when it finally came to you?
I have a playlist for every book. And in fact, I can pull up the playlist right now for this particular one. I was listening to Bizet,
Okay.
and Bach Concerto in D minor for 2 violins, a particular favorite. The Dubliners. I was listening to some Gregorian chants as well from The Beautiful Mystery. And then because I'm a child of the 70s, essentially, 60s and 70s, mostly 70s, I was listening to Stairway to Heaven, Classical Gas. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Really popcorn? Oh my God. I can't believe I'm admitting this. Forget I said any of that.
Very eclectic, very eclectic.
Yeah. And Flat and Scruggs, Foggy Mountain Breakdown. I mean,
that's fun. That's fun.
It is. But it takes, I don't know what is going to free it up. And sometimes I'm not sure it's the music so much as the actual music, is just the existence of the music in my head finally gets down deep enough, and then I can see it, then I can hear it, I can see the confrontation, I can see what they're saying to each other.
Right. There's an engineering company, which is a significant part of the plot, the murder plot, the mystery plot, GHS. And when I read those 3 initials, I immediately thought of 3 other initials, SNC. Was that deliberate, or are there parallels?
I'm trying to think of what my lawyer would say.
Well, it's sort of obvious. I mean, you're from Quebec, but...
And that was happening. That whole SNC scandal was happening as I was writing it. So I didn't start off with that, as I'd already framed in my mind what the plot would be before the SNC thing happened. But then it did seem fairly obvious to allude to that.
Okay.
Say no more.
I think your lawyer's okay with that.
Yeah, well, if not, I'm pointing him in here. You're direct. Eric made me do it. I didn't want to.
I have to say, I love your acknowledgement essays at the end of your books. I really do. I find it very hard not to read them at the beginning, because I know that they can give away some of the plot. But in this one, and it's a longish one, this essay at the end.
But it's riveting, isn't it?
Pardon, it's what?
It's riveting.
It is. It is riveting. And, which is where I'm going, you make it very clear that this book, like most of your books, is about love, about belonging, about family, about friendship, and at the very end, that goodness exists. And so these themes have been throughout the 16 books, but always been there. So I was wondering, when you started writing these novels 20 years ago, did you start writing mysteries, or did you start writing books about belonging and family and relationships and goodness?
That's such an interesting question. I started writing mysteries for sure. I did not, however, read, because I read a lot of mysteries. I read Small C Catholicly, I read a whole lot of things, but I read mysteries. So I wanted to set one, but I didn't know that there were rules. Apparently there are rules, right? So I just wrote a book I would want to read. And as it turned out, it has all of these other themes. I'm not a big fan of this whole genre label. I think Hamlet was a crime novel, or a play. It's a murder mystery. I think, obviously Alias Grace, The Handmaid's Tale. I mean, all of these. There's a huge tradition in literature of crime, and so I just simply wrote a story that brought in all sorts of themes that interested me. Including the struggle of goodness, to be good. How hard is it to be good? It's so easy to be cynical. It's so easy to be cruel, to be cutting, to be sarcastic. And in fact, that's rewarded. You're considered clever. That if you're kind, if you're good, if lobbed a softball that you can hit out of the park by saying the nasty comment, but if you just let it pass, you're considered weak or slightly stupid. So that the struggle to be kind in a world that doesn't necessarily, and we're seeing it now, God knows, doesn't necessarily reward kindness, I find very interesting. And some people early on said, well, you can't maintain it because you can't maintain kindness. Well,
16 books later.
Yeah. I sort of thought, oh, that's kind of sad. I mean, of course you can. And I just find it really interesting. I find it so interesting to follow decency than to follow cruelty. Anyone can be cruel. Anyone can be cruel. It takes a whole lot more character to be decent.
You live a very open and a very public life with whoever seeks you out. I mean, we know a lot about you, your life with your late husband and the love of your life, Michael, and your travels.
You met Michael, you know Michael.
I did, very happily at a concert in Ottawa. I remember it very, very well. But for those who haven't met him, they've met him through your website, through social media, through all that you've written, your travels, your earlier struggles with alcohol, your fears, your joys, all the dogs. So you made this decision to be very open early on, to make yourself even vulnerable. It seems very brave to me in this social media drenched world.
It's something that I struggled with, that where are the boundaries, because I am happy, obviously, to talk about my personal life, and I do it thoughtfully. No post is put up by mistake, or when I'm drunk, because I don't have that excuse anymore. But I try to make the distinction between what is personal, what is private. And I have a very rich and real private life that nobody knows about except my close friends, my confidants. So I think of my life really as it's like a home. Almost all of my analogies have to do with home for reasons that are not surprising, perhaps. And I think if there's some people who are allowed onto the front lawn, and there's some people allowed onto the front veranda, some people who get into the kitchen, and some people into the living room. So there are stratas where I let people in depending on who they are. With social media, I think I've sometimes made a mistake. I think part of my mistake is taking some of the more nasty comments personally, as though they actually reflect on me rather than on the person making them.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's, I'm happy to be open. I think partly because, you know, we all struggle, and I think it's easy to look at someone who is successful and think that, well, the bread always fell butter side up. And I, you know, the other thing, Eric, was when I was writing blogs at first, way back in the day.
Mm.
And those were quite long essays. And this was when nobody was, you know, Michael would read them maybe, or at least pretend to read them. And I think that was about it. And then my American publishers said, you know, there's this thing called Facebook. Maybe you want to move over to it. And I didn't want to. I was really resistant. I thought that it was both invasive and banal. And I thought, that's not, I don't think I want to be part of that. But they convinced me to do it. And I went along kicking and screaming. But as the years went by and as the posts went by and as my life evolved, it became more meaningful to me. And then finally, when Michael was diagnosed with dementia and we went through that journey, and I talked about it on Facebook. Almost every day I would post, but I was also very careful. There were things that were happening that is nobody's business. And I wanted to be respectful of Michael's privacy as well. But I also wanted to be fairly open about it. And the weirdest, the strangest, the most wonderful thing happened is that there was then this alchemy. It moved from being a marketing tool to being just this immense comfort to me. I felt the comfort. People would write back and tell me what they were going through. And suddenly we created a community of thousands of people, but we all hurt, we're all broken. We're all wounded somehow, whether it's dementia or cancer or mental illness or alcoholism or just or fears, insecurities. And it really helps to be open and have, I think some of the two of the nicest words in the English language are me too.
Yeah, well, I think it has created this incredibly large community for you. I mean, there are writers who want nothing to do with publicity, right? Who just, they say the work is here and that's it. And sometimes that's been very successful for them. But for you, obviously, you've done it very differently. And it has created this community. And I think it's probably had a lot to do with your success as well.
One of the things that I'm very clear about, and my publishers, God bless them, haven't queried this or pushed me in any way, is despite the fact that it is a marketing tool, obviously, I don't think anyone who joins my Facebook, you know, thinks otherwise, but way more than that, it is about community building. So I almost never tell someone to buy my book or any other book. I just talk about my life. And if they happen, I was given some advice early on, and I followed it. And in fact, it wasn't even given to me. I happened to be eavesdropping on another conversation. And it was the first, my book wasn't even out. And Michael and I went to the Atwater Library, a great old private library in Montreal. It was holding, the Crime Writers of Canada were holding the Quebec chapter, an open house. So they had invited all sorts of authors there. And for some reason, I think I got invited because I think they knew that my book was coming out soon. I didn't know anyone. I was a new kid in school. It was terrifying. But we were at the beverage table and someone was pouring coffee and two authors were talking. And one said to the other, do you know, my advice to you is almost never talk about your book. You know, talk about yourself and your process. And if they like you, they'll probably like the book. And I thought, that's true. I like books written by my friends. You know, even if they're crap, I have completely suspended judgment. I simply like them because I like that person. And I thought, yeah, I feel comfortable doing that. Maybe it's a Canadian thing. I've never felt comfortable telling anyone to buy my book or you know, now that the book is out, we're in that 1 week, 2 week, 3 week period where reviews are coming out. So I'm obviously posting about the reviews and how thrilled I am. I would be foolish not to. And I am thrilled. I mean, it would be churlish of me to be given so many blessings and not to enjoy them, and not to be overjoyed when something great happens, and to share it with people. And I've made it fairly clear on Facebook, I think, that if someone doesn't like what I'm posting, that's fine. You know, go away or stay. I don't care. I mean, I want people to be happy and to be healthy, but I don't need to twist myself into a pretzel for approval.
I always think one of the measures of a true friend is that they really, they never resent your success or your happiness, right?
Right. Was it Bette Midler who said, one of the, or was it Cher? Anyway, one of them said that one of the great challenges of huge success was finding someone who'd be happy for you. I can't, anyway, there's a whole bunch of wonderful quotes along that line, but it's true. And I've been lucky. I mean, most of my friends I've known from long before, so they saw the struggle and they knew the dream. And I can think of only one who turned their back and was kind of nasty. And that was painful, but you know, what can you do?
What can you do?
Yeah.
Well, you know, speaking of your life, I wonder how it's changed these past couple of years, because you are now a bona fide mega star writer. So how has it changed?
That's an interesting question too. There's a lot more financial security. At the beginning, for about the first, I mean, you know this, for about the first 6 books, everyone thought I was a success and I was moving up the bestseller list, and certainly the books were getting better and better, you know, in terms of sales. But it took at least 6 years to start making any sort of money. I remember going to the accountant with Michael. I think this was when book 5 had just come out. And we were doing taxes, and the accountant turned to me and said, "Now, Louise, now, exactly how long do you think you're going to be a deduction?" Question. And at that time, it seemed like forever. I don't know. So it's one of the sadnesses for me is among the many of losing Michael is that just as he was diagnosed with dementia was when things really began to turn around financially, where the good thing was that then I could afford the care that he needed. So that was just an incredible blessing. And that was because I think that's part of the bond I feel with the readers, is I'm very aware that without their support and buying the books and spreading the word and all that, the emotional support they gave me, but also it translated into financial support, that translated into caregivers and all that Michael needed. But he didn't get to see this apartment. He would have loved this flat in London. He loved London. He didn't get to enjoy all the things. And he was the one who invested so much emotionally and financially in this series. Right.
It's very clear from reading your books that you love food. So
nice to say from reading the books, not been looking at you.
Well, I'm saying, I was going to say, how do you keep your girlish figure, Louise?
Excellent. Do you know what? I'll tell you. It isn't nice of you to say that, and I will take it as the compliment that it is. I will not stand up and let you see what's happened to the girlish figure. But what I did in the COVID, in the lockdown, I thought I was going to teach myself piano. Got a keyboard, got everything. Did not happen. I think I figured out how to plug it in, and now it's just sitting there in the corner. But I also knew that if I didn't do something to start moving, this was going to be, this was going to be a problem. So I decided I would learn to run. So I got a private trainer actually who happens to be in London, and I'm in Quebec, and he started training me on how to run. So now I run 5 kilometers at least 5 days a week, mostly around the apartment. which is really hard because all you end up doing is going around and around the kitchen island or the sofa. So I'm actually I just sort of run like this most of the time. If I ever go outside, people are going to want But that's been such a revelation. I never knew I could do that. And it's been just wonderful, a real eye-opener for me. At the age of 62 to start running, I'm overjoyed about that. Also, I'm overjoyed because most of the time when I'm running around the sofa or the kitchen island, I'm thinking jelly beans, jelly beans.
Or croissant, or
Croissant.
tarte au citron, or
Yes, exactly.
right. So as you said, this is the first weeks of the launch of the book, and we know already that, for example, in Winnipeg, the book has been flying off the shelves at McNally Robinson, the great bookstore in Winnipeg, and elsewhere, I know. But do you get nervous when a new book is launched?
Oh, yeah. There are a couple of really, really scary times in the life of a book after it's written. I mean, the whole process of writing is terrifying. But one is when you hit send and it goes into someone else's hands. It's generally my assistant Lee and friend Lee's and my agent and the publishers, my editors. Because of course, the moment you hit send, you know that it's a pile of merde. You just know, you were like, oh my God, what was I thinking? I should have put Margaret Atwood's name on it. Like Kathy Reichs. So that's really scary when you send it out. Because at that stage, I'd spent 8 months or 9 months writing it, more than a year thinking about it. I produce one thing in a year. I don't do short stories. I don't do origami. I don't do anything. I just write this. I put everything I have into it. So there's a lot riding on it. And I don't know anymore if it's any good or not. I know it's the best I could do, but you know, eventually there's going to be a stumble. And I'm sure some people think some of the books are exactly that. So that's scary. And then the other scary thing is when it gets out of the publishing house, which has a vested interest in believing it's good, into the hands of the critics, and then into the wider world, which is really where it counts. So yeah, the last Sunday, Monday, the book came out on Tuesday. I don't think I slept at all. It's just, it doesn't seem to get better. You'd think this insecurity might evaporate, but it just doesn't. Do you know what does change is that there is less writing on it. Early on, a few stumbles would have killed my career. The publishers would have stopped publishing it. The booksellers would have stopped taking it. There would have been no word of mouth, and it would have just died. Now, you know, I think I have slightly more confidence. I guess. I don't know. A couple of days of not sleeping doesn't speak well of my confidence.
Well, I suppose, and I think, I mean, every artist, every musician, writer I've ever interviewed, I think there's always some aspect of that, because it must drive you to excellence, right? To working, to doing the best you can.
Yeah, and in every book, because I write a series with the same group of characters for the most part, essentially set in the same place for the most part, Three Pines in Quebec. The challenge is not to actually write the same book, to become formulaic. It's
right.
Not to become formulaic, not to fall into that. And so as a result, with every book, I try to challenge myself, whether it is a structural issue or a thematic issue, tonal issue. In this case, it was a number of issues, including the location. So yes, it's a risk every time. It's a risk. I have in front of me when I write, I have a poster with the last words of Seamus Heaney on it, where he said to his wife on his deathbed, "Noli timere," which means be not afraid, because I am afraid every day I sit down in front of the laptop to write. I am afraid, and I have to look at that and say, just, you got to keep pushing yourself. You have to risk, you have to risk, you have to risk.
Yeah. You know, Louise, I'm seeing we have a lot of questions. Shall we start taking audience questions?
I would love to. Whatever's for you, Eric.
Okay. Well, I have other questions, but I think since we have so many people with us, I think we should give them a chance. So let me take a look. I've got two different sources here. Judy Rabbits. Will your next book take place in London? We all need to travel through your book since we can't due to COVID.
Oh, that's a great. I'm actually writing the next book here in London, but I don't think that's exactly the, the question he was asking. No, actually, I think I can be quite clear that the next book is back in Three Pines. But I may come to London at some point. Armand went to Cambridge.
Right.
So, you know, there could be some pull. I've sort of toyed with the idea of setting it in London or Cambridge or somewhere in the UK. And that would make this apartment tax deductible.
I mean, it's not yet. Okay, we won't get your accountant involved here because
No, we've already got the lawyer involved.
we have already got the lawyer involved. So Bruce Matheson says, is there a large amount of travel connected to your book research? That I think we sort of know the answer to that, but.
Well, not yet. Well, I mean, it sometimes, not all the time though, because that's the beauty of having it set pretty much where I am actually sitting, is that I don't need to do a lot of traveling. But yeah, for the Paris book, obviously, for the book on the Gregorian chants, I mean, I didn't have to travel, but we went to a nearby monastery and spent the night and spoke to the monks and spent quite a bit of time with the monks. I do quite a bit of research, but a lot of it is done online now, unfortunately.
Yeah. Natalie Cassidy has a two-part question, and this is a question that interests me. She says, is there any possibility of making your books into a TV series, or I would add into a movie?
Well, one was made into a movie many, many years ago. That experience taught me that I never want to do it again.
Really?
I think the books are very hard to translate. Again,
so you just weren't happy. You weren't happy with it?
Well, again, I think, you know, some of that was me, some of it was them, some of it wasn't the actors. They did a great job. I just think, you know, yeah, it's a difficult thing so that it doesn't become like Murder, She Wrote in Three Pines. It doesn't become cutesy. These are, you know, again, the books are about many things, including duality. So they're set in this bucolic, intentionally idyllic, almost hyper-idyllic setting, that there is this magical realism that, again, is intentional. It's only ever found by people who are lost. It's not on any map. This is Three Pines. And so I think a lot of people and a lot of filmmakers mistake that for it being a village cozy. And it's not. They are you know, psychological thrillers. There's a lot happening there. So I think it's a bit of a challenge for filmmakers to grasp that and then to translate it.
We have a question from Solveig Swinhammer, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who wants to know what is the most likely moment of inspiration for your plots? What books do you read for leisure, when, if you have time?
In terms of inspiration, I get a lot of my inspiration from, well, some from the news, you know, just a lot from, it sounds ridiculous, a lot from poetry. I love reading poetry. And because the books, again, aren't really about murder, the murder is the vehicle. So I choose the themes, I choose the main emotions, the cardinal issues that are going to be explored, and then I devise a crime that would act as the best vehicle for that. So it starts, in one of the books, Ruth quotes Robert Frost, who said, not in a poem, but in a letter to a friend, that for him, a poem begins as a lump in the throat. And for me, the books are similar to that. They begin as a lump in the throat, as something that happens to me when I'm reading a poem, and sometimes I can't even explain why a couplet or a particular poem just grabs me, and I'll write it down and then think about it for a while, and that will become the starting point, the seed. Sometimes then the book goes off in such a different direction, you'd never know that that was the starting point.
Right.
But that often is, and sometimes it's just intuitive.
Books you read for leisure. Now, you told us earlier that you do read mysteries. You're a fan of mysteries. Can you be specific about any, or would you rather not?
Well, I don't actually read mysteries anymore.
Sorry.
No, I did, for sure. I read mysteries voraciously since I was, was first handed. I didn't read any of the Bobbsey twins or Nancy Drew. I went straight to Agatha Christie. My mother handed me the first. She just finished it and she handed it to me. It was the first time my mother and I shared a book. And I think I was about 10 or 11, and it was exciting. It was still warm from her hands, and I opened it immediately. And I think that was part of my affection, lifelong affection for Agatha Christie, as I related it back to that moment. But I've read crime novels up until I started writing them. And then I stopped reading crime novels because I was afraid of being influenced. I read for relaxation. And now when I read or try to read crime novels, it feels like work, because I'm always analyzing, why does that work? Why doesn't that work? That's a great character. That feels off. So I just find it's easier now. I have a huge to be read pile. I find it easier now. I just read a lot of nonfiction. I got one of the books that I'm about to start is called The Birth of the Chess Queen, which sounds fascinating. It's all about the fact that the queen didn't exist in chess for hundreds of millennia. And then she was created, and she became just about the most powerful figure on the board. And so it's obviously a symbolic. So I'm looking forward to reading. But that's the sort of thing I read, the sort of esoteric, strange stuff that may or may not end up in the book.
Right.
Because if I'm going to spend time reading about it, I might as well throw in some arcane knowledge.
Right. Right. We have a question from Judith Love Eastham, who says, I'm an audiobook listener and I'm fascinated with how you found such wonderful narrators.
Oh, isn't that kind? The first narrator was Ralph Cosham. And Ralph read through to, I believe it was book 9. And then he passed away, which was very sad. He had become a personal friend. In fact, he had been nominated for an Audio Award, which is the audiobook equivalent of the Oscars. It's the highest award. He lived in Washington, and I was obviously in Quebec. And but he wrote to me with the news and said, "Would you be my date?" I've asked my wife if it's okay. Would you be my date? So I asked Michael. He said, "Fine." So we met in New York, where the awards were being given out, and he was in his so handsome. He was in his dinner jacket, and I was in my finery, and we went to it was in the New York Public Library, and all these celebrities were there. And we were seated close to the front row. And it came time for his category. And he had been pretty cool up till then, very suave, very, very together. And then suddenly he gripped my hand and he turned to me and he said, "I want to win." And I thought, oh, damn, whoever's name they call out, I'm going up there and I'm grabbing it for Ralph. But he won.
He did. Okay.
He won. So there's pictures of him up there holding it, and me, like, insane in the background. I think I was the only author who jumped on stage with it had nothing to do with me. It was his performance. And then he died about a year later. But to be honest with you, I have nothing to do with whoever asked the question. What was the name of the person who asked the question?
Judith Love Eastham.
Yeah, Judith, I have nothing to do with choosing narrators. That's just good luck. They had difficulty replacing Ralph, of course, because he was so associated with Gamache in particular. But they found Robert Bathurst, who is a very well-known British actor. And it's taken Robert, by his own, and Ralph even said, listen to Still Life. That's not the same rendition as the later ones, because he had to sort of grow into the characters as well, as did I. And the same with Robert. The first one, not quite, wasn't quite there. The second one closer. And now last year he won Audio Narrator of the Year at the Audies. He beat out, I can't remember who. Let's say Laurence Olivier.
Really?
Yes, really.
Oh, okay. Wow.
I can't remember who, but he beat out some really big names.
We have a question from Ellen Dufour, who writes, comic relief in your book seems to revolve around Beauvoir. Why him?
Well, that's an interesting comment. Certainly he's a kind of an everyman. And he's a counterpoint to Armand, certainly earlier on in the books where, because he's very Francophone, and the Anglophones just completely baffled him. And so he would make some, maybe slightly disparaging, but certainly strange, funny observations about the strange Anglos in Three Pines. I'm sort of hoping that they all have their moment of humor, because we do, don't we? That even in the middle of something terrible happening, something funny can go on. Ruth, has her moments, certainly when she calls him numbnuts, for instance, and
Yeah.
there are other. Armand clearly has a sense of humor, but it's gentle. It's more gentle than some of the others. It's important that these not be caricatures. That these are people in full, and that we recognize there's no one who's superhuman there. There's no one who is a caricature, I'm hoping.
Here's a question that I was going to ask, and I'm glad that Gail Fenderson is asking it. Can you talk a little bit about scents, aromas, perfumes, especially in this latest novel?
This is someone who's clearly read
Yes.
this novel. Well, in fact, I want to tell you, Eric, I actually put on perfume for you today.
Oh,
yeah.
I can't tell, so you must.
I may be slightly unclear on how Zoom works, but I really want, if possible, it's something I struggle with, but the ideal is, and I think for most authors, is to drop that fourth wall so that anyone who's reading it just steps into the action, and so that you don't feel like you are reading about Armand or Reine-Marie or any of them, but that you are walking beside them, and that you can taste the food that they're eating, you can feel the cold, you can smell the wood smoke. So all the senses are engaged. That's what I try to do. And of course, scent is such a powerful sense, isn't it?
Yes.
It directly linked to memory. This book has a lot to do with memory. Not only what we remember, but how we remember things. And in this book, one of the main clues has to do with a perfume, or a scent rather. And that actually came about because actually the scent that I'm wearing now is my mother's scent. But I didn't know it for a long time. For years, I would every now and then, a woman would walk by and I would catch just a whiff. I would suddenly be with my mother. And I knew it had to do with the scent. But I wasn't, by then she had, dissolved into the crowd. So I decided about a year and a half ago, maybe two, to try to track down the scent. So I would go to I would go to Macy's, or I would go to, the big stores in Ogilvy's in Montreal, or here to Fortnum's and the others, and try out different scents just to try to figure out what it was. And I finally tracked it down. But it was such an odyssey that it gave me the idea for doing something similar in this book.
Well, it's the one in this book is one that my father used all his life. So
is that right?
All his life, and so from one of my very earliest olfactory memories is this scent. I'm not going to say what it is because it's,
Oh,
you only review it, but it's true. It's true.
okay.
It's a kind of leitmotif in the freezer,
Yes.
you know, with my kids and many
So would
others.
you use it? Would you ever put it on?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Do you wear it?
Not regularly, partly because I have allergies, so I have to be
Oh,
careful.
right.
So between vetiver and this, I would try it. I would, yes. In fact, I still have my father's last bottle. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah.
I love that. Mm.
Anyway, next question comes from Carol Dufresne. As Gamache ages, how are you going to handle this, seeing as the book started off with him older?
I know. I know. It's right up there with Let's Go to London when the book is published. I know. I'll start a series with an older detective. That'll work. Honestly. The thing is, and this came from Peter Robinson, is that there is real aging and then there is book aging.
Right.
And the while the books come out one a year, the actual crimes, these don't happen year after year. One a year in Armand's life. They happen 3 or 4 in one particular year. So he's not aging. He hasn't aged 16 years because we're following different crimes in his life. Having said that, other people are growing older and he is not growing as old as I am. So yeah, I think I'm just going to have to rely on the reader's suspension of disbelief and acceptance that, you either accept that he is perpetually close to this age. I mean, he is aging slightly, or he ages out and we stop writing the books.
Okay. Here's a really good question too from Ada Millette. How have you managed to balance the subtle relationships between the Anglos and the Francophones in your novels? This is a delicate relationship I lived, having grown up a few blocks from Atwater in Montreal. At times I have seen acrimony between these groups that have loved both the Anglos and Francophones of Montreal. I feel you are on the same page.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I didn't at first for the first few years, and then I realized I really did want to talk about it because it is a reality in Quebec, of course. The interesting thing in Quebec is that everyone in Quebec is a minority. The Francophones are a minority within the vast continent, Anglo continent of North America. And the Anglophones in Quebec are a minority within, the majority Francophones of Quebec. And when you live with everyone who is a minority and acts like a minority, then there's a certain sensibility. And that sensibility is slightly along the lines that you suspect the other is about to do something unpleasant to you. So there are guards up. But at the same time, I was a journalist for many years and I covered Quebec politics and I lived in Montreal. But at the same time, I came to it from outside. So I had that. I wasn't born and raised in Quebec. I didn't lose a lot in the Quiet Revolution. I didn't gain a lot in the Quiet Revolution or in the October Crisis or all those things, the Parti Québécois, the sovereignty referendums. I didn't have as much skin in the game as others. And so I think I had a certain perspective perhaps, but it became very clear to me that Quebec works in reality, but not necessarily on paper, that there is a problem. If there is a problem, it exists mostly in the big cities. Outside of Quebec, outside of Montreal, there's very little acrimony. But I tried to talk honestly about the Francophones and how diminished they were for years by the Anglo minority. Absolutely did that to them. The church did that to them, held them down, which is where what happened in 1960 and the Quiet Revolution, when they became maîtres chez nous, the masters of their own household. That was the the aspiration, and rightly so. But in order to do that, the Anglos had to be kicked out of the house, or felt they were. And so there's that tension. I think it's less and less so now, although the current government is not as friendly toward the Anglophone or any minority for that matter, which is upsetting.
Right. Can we take two more quick questions?
Yes.
Okay, so here's one from Jacqueline Chamberlain. Which of your characters do you identify? No, yeah. Which of your characters do you identify with the most?
Well, I started off believing I was Clara. Not that I look like Clara. I mean, none of the characters look like the people necessarily that they were inspired by, but their essence is that person, or at least inspired by. So a lot of Clara, who is a painter, struggling at first, going her own way, exploring all of her insecurities, which I understood as a writer. I mean, all the creative energy comes from the same taproot. It just comes out in different ways, whether you're a musician or a writer or a dancer or an artist. It all comes from that same spot. So I can write
Right.
Clara, even though I'm not a painter. But I think I have elements of all of them, including Ruth. I mean, I can write an embittered old woman because I am fast becoming that.
Oh, come on. You never would become that.
Well, wait for it. I'm constantly writing angry letters. I'm not actually writing them. I'm composing them in my head, but they never get written.
Well, speaking of Ruth, and this will be the last question because we do have to wrap up. The time is there. Michael O'Neill, was there a particular poet who was the inspiration for Ruth?
Yes. I don't write Ruth's poetry. If you look at the beginning of every book, there's an acknowledgement, there's a permissions page, and that lists where the poems are from. And Ruth comes from two sources. One is a woman named Marilyn Plessner, who actually passed away before her book was published. Wonderful little book of poetry that was essentially self-published by a friend of hers, and I was given a copy. Ruth's line, who hurt you once so far beyond repair, that you would greet each overture with curling lip, is from that particular poet. But probably the majority of them come from Margaret Atwood. Used with permission, of course.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to bring Barbara Bell, who is the executive director of the Writers Fest, back in as we wind up. I just want to say the book is All the Devils Are Here. It's out. It's fabulous. And thank you for it. Louise, thank you for this hour. It's such a pleasure to engage with you. And we love you for your success. And we love you for you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being my friend and always being so happy for me. And as I said, when the Kingston Writers Fest approached me, I couldn't say yes fast enough to support them. They're such a fabulous festival, and also to support the Novel Idea bookstore. But when I heard it would be you interviewing me, I was ecstatic. Thank you.
Go well.
And I want to thank you both. That was really such a rich and illuminating conversation. And our 500 plus participants, I'm sure, would be happy to listen and listen and listen. It's been so much fun. So thank you so much. I do want to shout out to those of you who joined us from all over North America. And I'm going to read, I hope I caught all of the different states and provinces. Washington, California, Colorado, Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Minnesota, Arizona, New York, New Jersey, Missouri, Washington, D.C., Ohio, Texas, Pennsylvania. And then here in Canada, folks from all over British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, and even Prince Edward County, Ontario. So thank you, all of you, for joining us. Thanks, Raincoast Books. Thanks, Novel Idea. And thank you for your support of Kingston Writers Fest. Do stay safe and well, and hope to see you back for our virtual festival, September 23rd to 27th. Enjoy your Labor Day weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.